What's up, y'all? You're listening to the Extra Point College Football Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Carnes, joined as always by my co-host, Daniel Hammock. Daniel, we have made it to championship week. We're going to break down 7 of our 10 conference championship games. Before we do that, and before we talk about a game that we're excited to watch that we're not picking, I did want to do a quick rankings reaction. So the College Football Playoff Committee just released our newest version of the rankings. The top 6 are as follows. It is Georgia, Michigan, TCU, USC jumps in the top 4. You've got Ohio State at 5, Alabama at 6, Tennessee sitting there at 7. Daniel, quick reaction. Did the committee get this right? What did they get wrong? What do you think?
So they got the important part right, which is the top 5, because that's, like we discussed, the only ones that have an actual shot at the playoff. I scratched my head at why they have Alabama over Tennessee. Just for the sheer fact, that's like the easiest layup. They have the exact same record, and there's a head-to-head win. So if you're splitting hairs, then the hair to split is the team that won. That seems to be comical that didn't get. So that alongside, they did get it right, the top 5, but I didn't mention this on the last show. Something I thought that they could do as kind of a qualifier is put Ohio State in at 4 and basically say USC you have to win, and have USC at 5, and basically let it be like, oh, the final data point that put USC in was having
winning
the extra game.
Yep.
I didn't mention that. I did kind of think that could happen. So this kind of gives me a little more faith that they're putting it this way. Basically, it's almost like they're setting up the future for this week. It's if USC loses, if you think about it like that, if USC loses, then they're losing their shot, but they're already in so long as they win. So I don't know. It's just different frame of mind. It all ultimately wouldn't matter. It comes down to if USC wins or loses anyways, but I did think that might be a possibility, but I'm glad that they did it this way. I think it's right. I am concerned about the logic that they put behind when they were asked about Alabama. So I will say, we've given the committee credit for past several years thinking that they pretty much have gotten the top 4 correct every year, and that's good. Usually college football sorts itself out anyways, so the committee really can't mess it up. That being said, I don't ever feel like I've, outside of a couple years, had a really good feel for what the committee's thinking at each individual junction. And I don't really think that they can coherently and concisely give like a proper explanation at any given time as to why the rankings are the way that they are. So I think that kind of gives more of an issue. I think they almost, but it could be by design. It could be to create exactly what we're doing right now, which is talking about why the rankings are, because they there's holes in their argument. They just will say something, and it seems like they're only thinking about one subject when they should take everything into consideration. I don't know. They could be by design. They could be playing dumb. It's a cat and mouse thing, or they could just really be,
Well, I'll say in their defense, so Boo Corrigan, he's the chair this year. He's the mouthpiece. Like, he's having to speak for the opinions. What is it? Is it 12 people, 16 people that are on the committee?
14. Yeah.
14. There you go. And so, they're going to have differing opinions. So they all vote. And it's kind of how we do with our piece of the XPR. We're like,
right.
If I think, TCU should be 4 instead of 3, but you think they should be 2, they average to a 3. So in the end, it's like, we're up there asking him questions that he could just, like, his best answer would probably be like, hey, we disagreed on this and the average was 5. So that's why they're 5. Like, that
I would
to me would be a better answer. Yeah, no, I'm with you.
Yeah, him trying to give rationale that there's holes in it. So it doesn't always make sense.
The point you made, it's never been consistent. It's never year to year. Like, they value this thing over the other. I'll say someone pointed out one thing that they have been consistent on is they will kill you for blowout losses. And I think that is the rationale behind Tennessee being behind Alabama. I disagree completely, especially because if you're looking at the rankings, There are two other instances within the top 25 where two teams have the same record and they played head to head. It's Florida State and LSU, and Florida State is at 13 and LSU is at 14. And then Oregon State and Oregon. Oregon State is at 15, Oregon is at 16. But then you go to Tennessee and Alabama, and it's Alabama 6, Tennessee 7. So again, they've never been consistent across the board. They'll use one thing to justify one team over another and then not let that carry even in the same week in the same rankings. Like, it's just so inconsistent. So again, we agree that in the end, college football sorts itself out and they get the top 4 right. But the process in which we get there, I don't enjoy. But like you said, it gets us talking, which has always been a fun part about college football, is debating who the best team is. Because for years, that's how we decided a national champion was debating who the best team was.
Right.
But Daniel, I will say, I'm looking at our XPR that we released today, our extra point rankings. According to our formula, if we're picking the 4 best teams, which I agree with our friend of the show, Kelly Ford, at K Ford Rankings or Ratings on Twitter, I think the committee should choose the 4 most deserving teams. If we're picking the 4 best teams, Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, and TCU. We have USC at 8 right now. So that might change if they win the Pac-12 championship and win in convincing fashion. That might change, but the computers still don't think USC is a top 4 team. Do you think USC is one of the 4 best teams?
I think it's more to say about the Pac-12 and their performance thus far against the other conferences. So I think that's what's hurting them is strength of schedule, strength of record, SP plus. I mean, like all of those things kind of cooked into one. There's been some games where they're dominating opponents, some games where they're not. I just think overall, I think by and large, the Pac-12 is the worst conference of the Power 5, and you're seeing that play out in their representative for potentially the college football playoff, their flagship being USC. It's like they're kind of propped up on some, lesser stilts than other conferences. It's tough because we talk about like the Big 12 kind of has the best middle of anybody. The Big 10 boasts, several, good teams and then a couple of elite teams. SEC, same story. ACC, it's tough because I think that by and large, a lot of the ACC schools, I don't know, I think they would probably beat the Pac-12 in many instances. I do think that, USC would pretty much anybody in the ACC. But anyways, I think it's about conference. I think that's probably you could bring it back to that no matter what, that the teams that they play aren't quite as highly rated as the other teams.
I will see your Pac-12 and raise you an ACC is the worst Power 5 conference this year.
It's fair. As I was bringing it up, I was thinking about how I don't trust the ACC, but I do think it'd be an interesting way to kind of go down the line of each one. I think that
So I'll say again, Kelly Ford, friend of the show,
yes.
He has average conference ratings, so power ratings. ACC is his lowest rated conference. Pac-12 is 4th, and they're close, to be fair.
Okay.
But like average rating,
that's why I pulled it up. I'm thinking about some schools that I think would, your UCLA's, they give good games versus ACC. If you did like a ACC Pac-12 challenge, which already sounds fun to think about,
yeah.
But just think about like some of the lower ranked schools like Syracuse versus like Arizona. It's like what's happening there. Syracuse been a little bit better this year. You think about like Florida State's had a good year. Would they play UCLA or would they play Oregon State or Oregon? That'd be a pretty good game. I think Florida State might come out on top, but then you kind of do the flip side of that. Like North Carolina, would they stop Oregon or would they, so that'd be a fun shootout, who knows? NC State, would they gut out a win versus Oregon State? I don't know. So it gets to be fun to talk about, but I think we're not trying to rate one of those of the contender conferences, which the ACC is not. Now that Clemson was eliminated for sure last week, then of the contender conferences is the weakest of the four. So I'll get 4 out of 5 is still fine. I do think conference is what's separating them from those other schools. So
Right. Dude, we're going to talk about 7 conference championship games. What is a game we're not picking that you're excited to watch?
Jacob, we've been talking a lot about the premier school in Ohio this year. You picked them to win your national championship. They still could make the playoff. There's only one championship game that's happening in the state of Ohio. That's Toledo versus Ohio, the MAC championship. So I'm going to be watching that game. Well, we'll see if I'm watching it. It's at noon, going head to head with the Big 12. I'll keep a second screen on it. But yeah, the Ohio Bobcats. The Ohio Bobcats.
The
All
one
right.
of 3 teams from Ohio playing in a conference championship this weekend.
Is Akron versus Buffalo a champion? It's not a championship. At least it does not say that it is.
Oh, no,
here.
that's not. It's a makeup game. I was going to
It's
say it's
just
the
the
same conference
end.
as the MAC.
Yeah,
They're all in the MAC. Yep. No, you're right.
it's okay.
Well, they're playing in week 14.
Hey, they're playing later than Ohio State. All right, and it's not the bowl game.
That's right. I would go Mountain West Championship, Fresno State and Boise State. Those 2 programs have kind of run the Mountain West. Boise State is back after a mediocre year the last few years. Last year they were decent, but back this year 9-3. Fresno State and 4, 3-point spread there, so pretty even matchup. Yeah, excited for the Mountain West Championship. We'll be sure to mention that one in our recap on Saturday. Daniel, Friday night, win and they're in. USC gets a rematch against Utah in the Pac-12 championship. USC is coming in as a 2.5-point favorite in Vegas. Who do you like in Vegas?
Yeah, I think that Southern Cal is going to channel their Vegas vibes as they put some money down on Caleb Williams to win the Heisman because he's now the odds-on favorite. I think that Friday night's going to be good to USC in this game. They're going to have it all to themselves as far as the stage being set. USC knows they win and they're in. Cal Whittingham can spoil it. I will say, I think the fact that they've already played, we've talked about this. Is it tough to beat a team twice? Yes, I think that could factor in a little bit. I just think it's going to be a tough game in general. I think Utah is going to give them a really good shot. It's going to be a hard-fought win, but I think because USC has seen them before, I think this helps. I think the first time they played was probably difficult, more so for Lincoln Riley game planning for what they're going to do against them. Getting a second shot, you've already seen him do everything right of the other games. This is an opportunity to avenge their loss. I'm going Southern Cal. I think this is their opportunity to do it, and I'm just going to take them. I'm going to take them to cover the 2.5 because if they win, it'll be by more than that.
Daniel, there's a coach in this game who has had to play in a conference championship as a rematch 4 times. Do you want to know his record? It's 4-0 and 4-0 against the spread. And in 2 of those games, he lost round 1 and then beat them in the rematch in round 2. That's Lincoln Riley. If you give Lincoln Riley a second chance to play your defense, you don't want Lincoln Riley to have a second chance to play your defense. So I'm with you. I'm taking USC. I'm taking it to win and to cover. They lost by 1 on the road in Rice-Eccles on a night where they were honoring their 2 players who had passed away. They lost by 1. And I'm going to trust the coach that has been in the situation before. 2 times where he beat the team the first time and had to beat him again. 2 times where he lost to the team in the regular season and had to beat them in the conference championship game. And he's 4-0 in those games. So I'll take Lincoln Riley to go 5-0 in conference championship game rematches to win and cover. USC wins and books their spot in the college football playoff in year one at USC, which is insane. And great for USC, great for Lincoln Riley. So I'm with you, Daniel. I'll take USC to win and cover. We go to Saturday, the Big 12 championship. TCU, number 3. I don't know if TCU is winning in based on I think they should be, but I don't know if TCU, if they lose, if they're going to be in. We'll see. But they can take care of business on Saturday and not have to worry about it. They can win, and they're in for sure. They're 2.5-point favorites in Arlington, Jerry World, against Kansas State, who they beat in the regular season. And so another rematch, Daniel. Where are you going in Arlington?
Yeah, this one is a little different because Kansas State gave them a great shot last time. They got up on them. I was excited because I took Kansas State at that time. We saw Will Howard come in because Adrian Martinez was injured. And I was like, oh, great. The backup's in. And then he went off. I think he threw 4 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns, something crazy in that game. Anyways, I think it's going to be another classic like that. But this time, TCU is going to be the front runner for the game. I don't think that they're going to be trailing like they were before. I think they were kind of surprised at what they're getting themselves into. I think it's battle tested, man. This until they play a team that is for sure better than them, which I don't think anybody in the Big 12 is because they haven't been so far. Until they play a team that is for sure 100% better than them, I'm just going to trust them to keep getting it done because if it's intangible that they need to draw from to get, a last second drive together, if it's to, run the field goal unit out, if it's to, whatever it may be, I think everybody is cool and calm and composed. And they're explosive, man. They're explosive. They've had games where they've had to win on defense. I think they're a chameleon. They can win however they need to against whatever team they're playing. And while I think Kansas State's a great opponent, I think they're going to give them a good shot. Like I said, I think this is something where TCU never trails in this game. I think they start with a lead and then keep the lead throughout. I could see Kansas State kind of, scoring late, keeping it close, but I'm gonna again take TCU to cover the 2.5. I think if they win, they're going to win by more than that. They're going to need to. So they're going to be wanting to show off style points, all that kind of stuff, I think, as well. Put some more stuff on tape for whoever they play in the playoff. So I'll take TCU.
So I have a trend I was going to use later. I'm going to go ahead and use it here. I just changed my pick. I'll be honest with you.
I talked you into or out of something.
I didn't like who I picked earlier. And so I picked Kansas State earlier. And the reason was I picked against TCU several times. Eventually it's going to hit. And if it doesn't, TCU fans can thank me later. So Kansas, and that was like all the stuff I put into it. But I think, let me read the stat. I'll tell you why this matters. So I think it's very common to say it's hard to beat a team twice. Do you want another record in conference championship games of the team that won the first game, what their record is in game 2?
This is for all conferences in the history of the world, or
all
what?
All FBS conferences, and it's specifically conference championship games and not bowl games. This is conference championship games that are rematches.
I'm not going to know. How many games was it?
I'm doing 56.
56? I don't know, like 30-20, something like that.
35-21. The winner of the first game wins it a little bit over 60% of the time. In the last 5 years, the winner of game 1 is 14-8, straight up. So I'm going to go TCU.
Like 2-1.
Yeah, I think it's, in theory, it's hard to beat a team twice. I think if you couldn't beat him the first time, it's really hard to beat him a second time for the most part. And so Kansas State had a big lead in this game, 28-10. They were up on TCU earlier in the season. TCU found a way to win that game. The 2.5 scares me a little bit because TCU is just fine, just like they were last week or 2 weeks ago, rolling out the field goal team with 1 second left and like winning this game by 1. They don't care. A dub's a dub to them. So the 2.5 does scare me a tiny bit just because it's TCU, but that's by a field goal. Yeah, man, they're kind of a team of destiny this year. So I'll roll with them. I think they locked their spot in the playoff. TCU 13-0. Go Frogs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
your rationale beforehand, I'm just going to pick them because it's got to hit at some point. That's what we call gambler's fallacy. And that ends up turning into a whole lot of hurt. All right. You would have definitely been wrong. So I'm glad you're on the right side. We're going to
It's
get
gonna
this
hit
one
in the
right
playoff.
together.
I
Yeah.
promise you that.
Well, they'll play a much better team probably in the playoff.
Either way.
Whoever they match up with.
That's right.
You know.
Boom. So I will take TCU, lay the points. All right. The Sun Belt Conference Championship. You've got the Troy Trojans and the Coastal Carolina Chanticleers. What a name. Troy, though, is a 10.5 point favorite. At home, they're hosting the game. Where are you going? In Troy, Alabama.
Yeah, I like this matchup. I'm interested to see if there's any rumblings of Jamie Chadwell because he's a hot name with all these coaching openings, especially the ones that are left open. I think those would all be it would make sense for him to go. It's not a huge job, but it's a next stepping stone. So that factor kind of has me wanting to lean Troy in this. I think Troy's going to win this game. They're a better team. They've shown it this year. But 10.5, I like that hook a lot. I'm going to take Coastal with those points just because I think that the way that they run their offense, there can be, ball control situations. There's going to be just time where I think they're going to be more in control of the game they want to play. But Troy might just be better, and they'll lose the game. But it's going to be there's not going to be enough time for Troy to have that big of a lead, if that makes sense. So give me the chance and the points.
Daniel, I've got a principle this week. It's going to apply to 2 games. Here's game 1. Game 1 of the interviewed in Atlanta at Georgia Tech this week. Specials of the week is fade Coastal Carolina because Jamie Chadwell was in Atlanta yesterday on Monday interviewing for the Georgia Tech job. So focus is not on Troy. He did not get the job, which for reasons we can talk about later when we talk about some coaching hires. But give me Troy, lay the points. Principle. Moving on. More on this later.
Yeah.
Let's go to the SEC Championship, 4 p.m. in Atlanta. So I guess we'll talk about 3 games that involve Atlanta. So in Atlanta against LSU, man, the heat and the intensity of this game kind of got taken off last week when Texas A&M beat LSU. LSU now coming in at 9-3 with no shot at the playoff. There's an outside shot if they were to win this game. With 2 losses, they had an outside shot at getting in. Doesn't matter now. Georgia's in regardless. They're 17.5 point favorites in Atlanta. Daniel, what do you think on the SEC Championship?
Yeah, this one's a little interesting because it's like I feel like it's somewhat of a dud in the sense we're going to have more of a dud later that we're going to talk about. But this one, exactly what you said about, my 10-2 LSU did not come to fruition. 9-3 LSU just doesn't have quite the same ring. But them losing that game, while it took some of the, I guess, the extra juice out of this game where, hey, there's an outside shot that they can make the playoff and do this kind of thing. There's still a lot of pride in winning an SEC championship. This matchup has happened several times in the SEC championship. It's the second most common matchup in the SEC championship following
Alabama, Florida,
which they've matched up 10 times. I think this one's the 5th iteration of Georgia and LSU. Georgia has lost 3 of 4 in the previous 4. So I
Yeah.
think Georgia has a little bit of juice of wanting to kind of right the ship, even this up a little bit in this SEC championship matchup. Um, heard a lot from the Georgia players this week saying stuff about, they want to put a number on the wall. They haven't gotten an SEC championship since 2017, even though Georgia has been in several of these games. They have not won it. And last year, when they won the national championship, they lost the SEC championship. So I think this game does hold a certain amount of importance for Georgia. I think it holds importance for LSU. I go around all this to say the only real question I have is Jaden Daniels 100% healthy or not? As far as if I think Georgia's going to cover. Because if he's not, I think the cover for Georgia is easy. If he is 100% or close to it, I think a running quarterback could give at least Georgia some headaches here and there. The 17 and a hook is where I'm at. You know, but I'm going to go ahead and just lay the points with Georgia because I don't know if Jaden Daniels is fully healthy. And I think once they kind of sink their teeth into him on defense, it's going to be tough sledding throughout the day. And then I think Georgia, when they've had moments where they've been streaky this year, where it's almost been like, do they want to play with their food before they eat it, or do they want to just go for it? Obviously, Oregon, they just dominated. When they had played against Tennessee, there was almost a different level of focus. Are we going to get that focus in this because it's a championship game? I think that we do. And I think Georgia playing in Atlanta to start the year might actually help them a little bit, being used to the surroundings, that kind of thing. So I'm going to go ahead with Georgia. I'm going to lay these points.
You mentioned Jaden Daniels being healthy. I don't think it matters. Here's why. Georgia played 2 before injury guys who I thought were going to be Heisman finalists at the end of the year. That's Bo Nix and Hendon Hooker. And they shut them down whenever they played this Georgia defense. You mentioned the streakiness. I just think Georgia has at least proven twice this year when they had to play 2 elite teams, they flipped the switch and they went into kill mode. And I think Georgia flips the switch, and we'll see if the best version of Georgia is good enough to go in a national championship. And that starts this week against LSU. I think there's a reason this point spread is at 17.5. I think the Georgia defense is good enough to hold LSU sub 20. I think it's good enough to hold them sub 17. Do I think Georgia can get to 34? I think so. So, or 35 gets me to 17.5 at that point. So, yeah, I think this Georgia offense, we're going to see the best version of in this game so far this season. Maybe not quite the Oregon game. I think that was a little bit of a blitz that they caught Oregon in. But I think you're going to see elite Georgia in this game. If I'm going to see elite Georgia, I'll go ahead and lay the points because they're 2-0 against the spread too, and they flip that switch. So I'll say they go 3-0 in this game. All right, Daniel, let's go to the Sun Belt, stay in the South. Tulane hosting the AAC championship against Central Florida. UCF won this game in the regular season. Now Tulane is a 3.5-point favorite at home. Where are you going in New Orleans?
Yeah, this one I did the wrong thing last time. I picked against UCF, who has been somewhat near and dear to my heart this year. I got off my ways. I'm not going to do it again. I'm going to take UCF with the points. Obviously, they beat them last time. Tulane has been at most for most of the season, I guess you could say, the better team. They've been the more attractive team, but I mean, this UCF team is built on more than just Gus Malzahn and John Reese Plumlee. They do have, a stout defense, at least, big time defensive players that have been recruited there. I'd be interested to see. I think they're going to win this game outright. So 3.5 points, getting that, I'm going to go ahead and just take it. UCF, they win this game.
Part 2 of the you were in Atlanta this weekend interviewing for the Georgia Tech job. Willie Fritz. So, yeah, UCF won this game the first time. UCF, let me watch my words here. I'm going to say in quotations, similar to Georgia in that they have looked so much better against better competition. Like you're talking, they're 9-3 because they've dropped some games they never should have lost, but they beat Cincinnati and Tulane. And so that got them the automatic berth. And then the two of them had to fight it out for the other spot. But they get to host it because they had a better, conference record. So yeah, I'll take, and again, I'll just mention my trend of the team that wins the first game usually wins the second game. And then, yeah, your head coach was interviewing for the tech job, and Willie Fritz apparently was not very happy that it got out that he was interviewing for the Georgia Tech job. So then he, recommitted this week. I love those where it's like, I'm signing an extension. I chose to stay here. When in reality, he just didn't want to make a decision before the American Championship, and Tech wanted to announce a coach this week. So we can talk more about that later. But all that being said, UCF plus the points. I think they win this game outright and win the American Conference Championship. I'm with you, Daniel. Let's go to the Big Ten. Michigan coming off of their dominant win over Ohio State. They won the Big Ten East for the second year in a row. They look to go win the Big Ten for the second year in a row. They are 16.5-point favorites over the West champion, Purdue, who wins the Big Ten West for the first time. Where are you going in Indianapolis?
Excuse me. This one, I think this is more about how much better the Big Ten East is than the Big Ten West. And it's less about the actual individual matchup. I think that Purdue can kind of move the ball a little bit and score maybe a couple times, but ultimately Michigan is going to dominate them on line of scrimmage, both sides, and they're just going to impose their will over the course of this game. I think that there is a potential for a letdown, obviously, after beating Ohio State last week. But I thought that last year as well, heading into the Big Ten championship. And Michigan took care of business there. They're going to take care of business here. I also think 16 and a half points, that feels right that they're going to be able to cover this. It kind of feels like this is going to be more of a first quarter game where they're going to be playing even in that first quarter. And then, the dam will kind of break and Michigan will continue to score. I can see Michigan putting points up in every quarter and something where Purdue only scores in the first quarter. And if I'm thinking that way, I think they cover this point spread.
I think there's a risk with Georgia and Michigan in that if you get up early, how soon do you pack it in? Because you know that you've got a playoff run coming, even though you've got a month to rest after this game. How much do you just, hey, we're not putting anything else on tape. We know we're good winning by a touchdown if we have to. Like, we're just going to basically go into prevent and run the ball. I think that is a risk for Georgia and Michigan not covering. But Daniel, you mentioned the Big Ten East being so much better. Michigan beat their Big Ten West opponents this year by an average of 15.5 points a game. That's really close to that 16.5 number. I'll go ahead and lay it with Michigan. Again, I think we're getting the best version of Michigan at this point in the season, which is a really good thing if you're a Michigan fan. I think we get that for at least a majority of this game before they pack it in. I think they get up by a few scores and then are able to hold on to that, win by 20 or so. I think they should against Purdue. They're much better. Again, my only worry with Georgia and Michigan is how quickly do they pack it in if they get a lead. So I do think winning the conference is important for both of these teams. So I don't think there's a chance they lose, but those are big numbers. I'll still lay the points of Michigan and hope they don't pack it in too early. Our last one, Daniel, the ACC championship. Clemson at 10-2, 7.5-point favorites. North Carolina sitting at 9-3. Both teams coming off of losses, stumbling into this game. Where are you going in Charlotte?
The Dud Bowl.
This
one is, it's a snoozer. It's tough because 2 weeks ago, Jacob, this is a game we were talking about as a potential quarterfinal for the playoff with Clemson and with North Carolina. I know that, that was still coming off of the loss for, Clemson with Notre Dame, but you're still thinking with one loss they had a shot. I think Clemson, because they're the better team, is going to win this game. 7.5 points is tough to lay with an offense like North Carolina on the other side. I just think that things are somewhat unraveling for North Carolina right now. I think that Clemson has more of a shot to right the ship just because of better players. And yeah, I just don't, I'm not going to be able to trust North Carolina's defense consistently. It is interesting because it's like good on good and, suspect on suspect because Clemson hasn't had the greatest offense, but I think that they're going to be able to do enough to score what they need to put this one away. 7.5 points. I wish it was less than a touchdown because you'd feel better in a scoring match for it to, it would be a layup. I feel like if it was just a touchdown, but I think Clemson wins by 10. So give me the Tigers, lay the points.
Yeah, Clemson is the better team. Again, I'm going to play the when they were 14.5 point favorites against South Carolina. I said, man, I don't think Clemson should be 14.5 point favorites against anybody this year with the way they've played close games. And so I will just do the lazy Clemson wins and North Carolina covers here. I do think North Carolina has a good enough offense to go score for score with Clemson. Clemson's defense has not played to the level that we thought they would be this season, where we're like, they're going to have the best defense in the country, best defensive line in the country. They've not played at that level kind of all season. And so
Right.
why am I going to expect them to play to that level this game and stop North Carolina? Now, how much does North Carolina stop themselves like they did against Georgia Tech and against NC State? We'll see. But I'll take North Carolina to cover and then DJU to transfer.
Ooh.
We'll see.
Interesting.
I don't know. I think he should. That offense is helping.
Where's he going to transfer?
I don't know, man. I don't know if he will either because I think the coaching staff has just put a lot of trust in him. I just feel bad for him because Clemson's offense is a problem. And it's because they promoted from within and no one on their staff has any experience outside of Clemson. And Bud Elliott's talked a lot about this. I just think he hits the nail on the head. Like when stuff goes wrong, usually you've got a bunch of guys in the room who can say, hey, when this happened, when I was at Texas Tech, we did this. And it's like, oh, well, when I was at UNC, we did this. And you're able to come up with a solution. Well, every guy in that offensive room is just, well, we were here 2 years ago. Well, we don't know what to do. Anyway,
right.
We'll have plenty of time to talk about Clemson this offseason, but I'll take Clemson to win the ACC championship, to get back on top of their conference they've owned for the better part of a decade. Go to the Orange Bowl, have fun in Miami, but North Carolina to cover in this game. I'll pick them to cover the 7.5. An ACC job we'll talk about Georgia Tech then Auburn. So Georgia Tech hires Brent Key, the interim coach. Georgia Tech alum, gets to keep the job. I assume as a part of his agreement, he's got to get rid of a lot of the staff that Collins hired. He'll have to hire a mainly new staff. But Daniel, I'm reading notes over on 24/7 yesterday that, Chadwell interviewed, Bill Clark interviewed, Willie Fritz interviewed. Key gets the job. Now, I think Key's a good hire. That's my initial reaction. Good hire. No nonsense, football guy, Georgia Tech alum, cool. Work with Nick Saban. Everybody wants a piece of that. I do think, though, so Fritz apparently has I say publicly, privately said at this point, like he didn't want to make a decision before his conference championship game this week. And Georgia Tech wanted a decision this week. I do think that if you think he's your guy, he's worth waiting 7 days for.
Right.
So I hope that Georgia Tech didn't hire Key just because they're mad. Fritz wanted to wait 6 more days,
Yeah, I think that was a convenience factor, but I also think talking to a guy on the inside that the push from the boosters was to go with Fritz, but there was a large contingent of players wanting Key, which is dangerous to make a hire based on just what the players want. But that speaks a lot to me because the players certainly weren't playing for Collins. they did play hard for Key, and he got 2 ranked wins, however you want to,
Yeah.
describe that down the stretch. And they certainly looked more buttoned up under Key. So those things, it's kind of an interesting thing because of not being a coordinator or play caller, just kind of getting the job, just because of merit. He's a good coach. He was
Yeah.
good enough for Nick Saban to hire. I gotta think that relationship helped because of Jay Batt being assistant athletic director at Alabama before he came
Yeah.
over. Typically, those guys like to hire their own guy. Key got lucky in that he already had experience around Batt from his time at Alabama. So I think that they felt comfortable enough where it wasn't like we're just keeping some of the old guard here. And I agree with you. I think they're going to be doing a good bit of changes to the staff, um, just repositioning on some stuff. And I think it'll be good for them going forward. I expect Georgia Tech. I think this was a good hire. Georgia Tech is better because of what they did. Would Fritz have been a little better? Potentially. Um, but I don't think I think he is the right guy to stay there for a while because he's from there. So he took a lateral move, moving from Alabama to Georgia Tech. I mean, really a downgrade, but lateral as far as job title. He did that because it's a place that he loves. So you got to think that he's going to do all he can to recruit there. I got several family members who are Georgia Tech fans. They all wanted to keep Key. So I think I think by and large they're all going to be very happy with their decision. Now we'll see if they're happy next year, but they're happy for now.
Speaking of schools whose players wanted them to keep their coach, Auburn also made a hire this week. And that's not about Cadillac Williams. That was about Brian Harsin this offseason. So we'll see how it works out. Auburn made a hire. Auburn hired Hugh Freeze after trying to get Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin saying no. They were going to hire Freeze, and then everyone was up in arms about it because it wouldn't be Auburn unless this was a crap show.
Oh yeah.
Then they do hire Hugh Freeze. Thoughts on Hugh Freeze to Auburn?
It's tough because you can't help but look at just. It's tough to have Harsin even in this conversation because it was such a small sample size, and I feel like he was never really given a shot. So I almost just take this right back to Gus Malzahn. I think it's a very similar comp to what Malzahn did, maybe just I don't want to say more formidable offense, but maybe a tougher offense to scheme for. Because I do think, and this also is, I think this hire has a lot to do with the rivalry with Alabama and Georgia. And Gus got fired because he never won the Georgia game, or rarely won the Georgia game. And I think that they've got to win one of those games yearly. And that's tough to say. They've got to be more consistent winning those games every other year, splitting with these guys, these teams. They put themselves on that pedestal. I think Kiffin obviously was the better coach, and that's why they wanted him first. Freeze has a ton of baggage. But I think all will be forgiven, as it always is in the SEC, if you win games. I did like that they kept Cadillac for what he did. I think he's a big program builder. I like that they gave him the associate head coach title. So if we're being honest, he was not quite qualified to be a head coach yet at a school like Auburn. But he's probably not that far along. That's probably what they saw as he progressed through everything. So I like that he's at least going to have that title alongside. But yeah, Freeze, I think he'll be better than Harsin. I think it was an improvement.
Yes.
So, that's all you can say is, are you better today than you were yesterday? Yes. So
we were talking about this before the show. Again, we're hours into this happening. My gut reaction is Hugh Freeze the third best coaching hire so far? behind Luke Fickell and Matt Rule? Like, was that the third best coach available? And my gut reaction is yes. And Auburn was the best job available.
Right.
And so that I'm like, okay, but if he's your guy, he's your guy. They wanted someone with SEC experience because, again, with coaching fires and hires, you always swing the pendulum. So you went and got an outsider. They were going to hire an SEC guy this time. And they got an SEC guy who beat Nick Saban, who recruited well at Ole Miss.
He
even
beat Kirby
though
Smart.
his new boss basically turned him in for cheating when John Cohen was the athletic director at Mississippi State and told the players to narc on what he Freeze and Ole Miss were paying kids. But now it's all legal. So you can see that out in the open now. Apparently there is alignment at Auburn. If you're Auburn and you just want to win and this is your guy, you bite the PR bullet, you hire Freeze. And I do think it's an immediate upgrade over Harsin. There's stuff written that like he wasn't even at Auburn yet, and he was already on the phone recruiting for Auburn. Which I mean, like he's going to recruit. I think he wins football games. I'd be excited to see even next season what he does with a quarterback like Robbie Ashford because he does a good job of developing quarterbacks. So I think Freeze is fine. Again, if you're Auburn, I just don't look at Freeze and be like, yes, he is going to get you where you want to be, which is consistently beating Alabama and Georgia. I don't know if he can do that.
I mean, he's beaten Kirby Smart. Granted, it was Smart's first year, and he had Chad Kelly.
And 3 first-round draft picks in that team.
DJU transfers to Auburn. You already said he should transfer, so now we found a place for him on the Plains.
There you go, on the Plains.
You heard it here
Their
first.
schedule next year, we'll see. They don't have anything crazy out of conference. They trade Penn State for Cal, so it's not gonna be a problem. It's an odd year. So year 1, you get Bama and Georgia at home. We'll see. We'll do a full breakdown of all the coaching hires in the offseason, kind of grade them all. But for now, be sure to follow us on social and on YouTube at the Extra Point Pod. Be sure to follow Daniel on Twitter at Deep South Daniel. You can follow me on Twitter at Jacob Carnes with a K. That will do it for this edition of the Extra Point. He is Daniel. I'm Jacob.